The girl asked the Vampire King why her mother's picture was in his mansion. Then everything changed. She was 17, thin from village life, with dark hair tied simply at her neck and eyes that held too many questions. She had lived her whole life in a small border village where people whispered legends instead of saying prayers. Everyone knew the stories of the Vampire King, but no one truly knew the truth. When the royal guards came for her, the village did not fight. They never did. Elira was chosen because she had no father, no strong family, and no one powerful enough to argue. The elders said it was an honor, though their eyes avoided hers. They said she would serve the king, that she would be safe inside his walls. Elira did not believe them, but she did not cry. She climbed into the black carriage without a sound. The road to the mansion felt endless. Forests grew darker, the air colder. Even the wind seemed careful there. When the gates finally appeared, tall and sharp like dark wings, Elira felt something strange, not fear but recognition. As if her feet had walked this place before, long ago. The mansion was not loud or cruel like the stories said. It was quiet, too quiet. Black stone towers rose into the sky, covered in silver symbols that glowed faintly. Long windows reflected moonlight like still water. Inside, the halls were wide and cold, lined with dark marble and burning blue flames that gave no warmth. Servants dressed in gray led Elira through endless corridors. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her for long. They brought her to a room prepared in silence. The bed was large, the curtains heavy. A silver mirror stood near the wall. Food waited on a small table untouched. "Rest," one servant said softly, then left. Elira sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded. Her heart beat slowly, heavy with thought. She had expected terror. Instead, she felt watched. That night, sleep came late. When it did, her dreams were filled with moonlight and a woman's voice she could not fully hear. The next evening, Elira was summoned. She was taken through halls deeper than before, where the air felt older. Finally, massive doors opened into a throne room carved from shadow and stone. At the far end sat the Vampire King. He was nothing like the monster from stories. He was tall, dressed in black and deep red, with pale skin and dark hair falling to his shoulders. His crown was simple, silver and sharp, resting easily as if it belonged there forever. His eyes were ancient, not cruel but tired, like someone who had seen too many endings. He studied Elira silently. She lowered her head as she had been taught. "You were brought here as tribute," the king said at last. His voice was calm, controlled, and heavy with power. "You will stay within these walls, you will obey the rules, you will be unharmed." Elira lifted her head slowly. "Yes, my king," she said. Something flickered in his eyes, not interest but surprise. Most girls trembled, she did not. "You may leave," he said, and just like that the meeting ended. Days passed. Elira learned the mansion's rhythms. She was allowed to walk certain halls, read from the vast library, and sit in the moon gardens where pale flowers bloomed only at night. Guards watched her, but they never touched her. She noticed something else. Whenever she walked through the halls, some servants bowed deeply. Others avoided her completely. Whispers followed her steps. "She looks like her," they said. Elira did not know who her was. One evening, while exploring a quiet wing of the mansion, Elira took a wrong turn. The air changed. The hall was narrow, lit by soft silver fire. At the end stood a single door, carved with symbols older than the rest. It was slightly open. She should have turned back. Instead, she stepped inside. The room was small but beautiful. Moonlight poured in through a tall window. Candles burned without melting. And on the far wall hung a single portrait. Elira stopped breathing. The woman in the painting had her face. Not exactly, but close enough that Elira's hands began to shake. The same eyes, the same curve of the mouth, the same dark hair. It was her mother. But her mother in the painting was young, dressed in royal black and silver, a crown resting gently on her head. She looked powerful and sad, like someone who carried both love and regret. Elira stepped closer. "This is impossible," she whispered. Her mother had died when Elira was a child. She had never been a queen. She had never spoken of kings or castles. Footsteps echoed behind her. Elira turned. The vampire king stood in the doorway. For a moment the world held its breath. His eyes moved from Elira to the portrait. The change in him was immediate. His face went pale, his expression breaking like cracked stone. The room seemed to darken, the candles flickering wildly. His hand tightened slowly at his side. "You were not meant to be here," he said quietly. Elira swallowed her fear. "My king," she said, her voice shaking but steady, "why is my mother's picture in your mansion?" Silence fell like a blade. The king did not answer. His eyes remained locked on the portrait as if seeing it for the first time in centuries. Pain crossed his face, deep, sharp, and uncontrolled. "Leave," he said suddenly. Elira did not move. "She looks like me," Elira said softly. "Why is she wearing a crown?" The air grew cold. The king stepped forward, towering over her, his shadow stretching across the floor. Power rolled from him like a storm barely held back. "Do not ask again," he said. Elira felt fear then, but also something else. Sadness. "You knew her," Elira said. The king's jaw tightened. For a moment his eyes burned red, then faded back into darkness. "Seal this room," he commanded sharply to unseen guards. "Remove the portrait. She is never to enter this hall again." Guards rushed in, bowing deeply. Elira was gently but firmly led away. As she was taken from the room, she looked back once more. The king had fallen to one knee before the portrait. That night, Elira could not sleep. Her mind burned with questions. Her chest ached with a feeling she could not name. She felt like her life had cracked open, revealing a hidden truth beneath everything she believed. When sleep finally came, her dream was clear. She stood in the same moonlit room. The woman from the portrait stood before her, alive, warm, and real. "Elira," the woman said softly. "Mother," Elira whispered. The woman smiled sadly. "He loved me," she said. "And he lost everything trying to save me." "What does that mean?" Elira asked. The woman touched Elira's cheek. "He broke the curse once," she whispered. "He will break it again, or it will destroy you both." Elira woke with tears on her face. Far away in his dark chamber, the vampire king stared at his own reflection, his hands shaking for the first time in centuries. Because the past had returned. And nothing would ever be the same again. Morning came quietly to the mansion, though the sun never truly touched its walls. Elira woke with her heart still racing from the dream. Her mother's voice felt close, as if it still lived in the air around her. The words echoed again and again in her mind. "He loved me. He broke the curse once." Elira sat up in bed, pressing her hands against her chest. Nothing about her life felt simple anymore. The world she thought she knew had cracked open, and behind it waited secrets older than her birth. Servants came with food and clean clothes, but their behavior had changed. They bowed lower now. Their eyes followed her with a mix of fear and respect. She noticed it. "Why are they acting this way?" Elira asked one young servant softly. The servant hesitated, then whispered, "Because the king has not sealed your fate." Elira did not understand, but the words stayed with her. She was not summoned that day, nor the next. But she felt the vampire king's presence everywhere, in the silence of the halls, in the way doors opened before she reached them, in the way the moon gardens glowed brighter when she walked through. At night she sensed his gaze, distant yet heavy, as if he were fighting a battle he could not win. The king, meanwhile, did not sleep. He stood alone in the Hall of Shadows, staring at the place where the portrait once hung. The wall was bare now, but memory filled the empty space. Her face, her voice, her sacrifice. Centuries ago, the woman in the painting had walked these same halls. She had laughed here. She had argued with him here. She had loved him here, and she had left him here. The king clenched his hands. He had ruled kingdoms. He had outlived empires. He had endured endless nights without fear. Yet the return of her daughter shook him more than any war ever could. She was not meant to come, he whispered to the empty hall, but fate did not listen. That evening, Alira was finally summoned again. This time, not to the throne room. She was brought to a quiet balcony overlooking the moon gardens. Pale light covered the stone floor, and silver flowers moved gently in the night breeze. The vampire king stood with his back to her. "You asked a question you should not have asked," he said without turning. Alira stood still. "I deserved an answer." He turned slowly. Up close, she saw how tired he looked. The power was still there, strong and heavy, but behind it lived something broken. "You look like her," he said, "but you are not her." "I am her daughter," Alira replied, "and she was my mother before she was anything else." The king looked away. "She chose this," he said quietly. "She chose to disappear." "Why?" Alira asked. The wind moved through the garden. The moonlight dimmed slightly. "Because of me," he said. Alira's heart tightened. He told her the story slowly, carefully, as if each word cost him something. Long ago, the land had been torn by a curse that fed on fear and time. To save the kingdom, a bond was formed, one that tied his life, his power, and his memory to the curse itself. Her mother had been part of that bond. "She was not forced," he said. "She offered herself so the curse would sleep." "And you let her?" Alira asked, pain sharp in her voice. The king met her gaze. "I begged her not to." Silence fell between them. "She loved you," Alira said, "even if she left." "I know," he answered. "That is why this hurts." From that night on, everything changed. Alira was no longer treated as a simple tribute. She was given access to deeper parts of the mansion. Ancient books were placed before her. She was allowed to ask questions, though not all were answered. She learned of old magic, of promises written in blood and moonlight, of curses that did not fade with time. And slowly she learned something frightening. The curse was not fully gone. It was waiting. The king's court began to notice his change. He ruled less harshly. He listened more. This unsettled the ancient nobles who had thrived under fear and distance. Whispers grew louder. "She weakens him," they said. "She reminds him of his past. She must be removed." Alira sensed the danger but refused to hide. One night, as she read in the great library, the king appeared without warning. "You should be careful," he said. "Not everyone wishes you well." Alira closed her book. "Do you?" The question surprised him. "I do not know," he admitted. They stood in silence, close enough that Alira could feel the cold strength of him, and beneath it the restraint. "You have power over my fate," she said. "You always have." "Yes," he said, "and I hate that." Something unspoken passed between them, a bond formed not of command but of shared loss. Days later, a seer arrived. She was ancient, wrapped in pale cloth, her eyes clouded yet sharp. She was brought before the throne, but her gaze locked onto Alira. "The past walks again," the seer said. "The daughter stands where the mother once stood." The court held its breath. "The curse stirs," the seer continued. "It remembers her blood." The king rose from his throne. "Speak carefully." The seer bowed her head. "The girl's heart will decide what remains. She will either free the king from endless night or end his reign forever." Alira felt the weight of those words crush her chest. "I did not ask for this," she said softly. "No," the seer replied, "but destiny rarely asks." That night Alira stood alone in the moon gardens, staring at the sky. She thought of her mother, of the king, of a future pulling her in two directions. Footsteps approached. The king stopped beside her. "If you wish to leave," he said, "I will let you go." She looked at him, truly looked at him, not as a ruler, not as a legend, but as a man bound by regret. "And if I stay?" she asked. "Then everything will change," he said. Alira turned back to the moon. "I think," she said slowly, "everything already has." Behind them, unseen by both, the silver flowers bent toward the dark. The curse was listening, and it had begun to wake. The days grew heavier after the seer's words. The mansion felt different, as if the walls themselves were listening. Shadows lingered longer. The moon gardens no longer slept peacefully. Silver flowers trembled even when there was no wind. Elira felt it most clearly in her chest. Something was pulling at her, quietly but firmly, like a thread tied deep within her blood. She tried to ignore it, to continue reading, walking, breathing as she always had. But the pull remained. The curse was awake. The Vampire King sensed it too. He became more distant, yet more watchful. His orders were sharper. Guards doubled in number. Ancient symbols were renewed along the halls. At night, he disappeared into the lower levels of the mansion, where old magic slept. Elira watched him from afar. She noticed the way his shoulders carried more weight, how his gaze often drifted toward her before he caught himself and turned away. Whatever bound them was tightening, and neither of them knew how to stop it. One evening, Elira felt the pull stronger than ever. Her steps led her without thought down winding stairs she had never taken before. The air grew colder, older. Blue flames lit as she passed, one by one as if greeting her. She stopped before a massive stone door. Her heart pounded. She knew this place. Not from memory, but from blood. The door opened when she touched it. Inside lay a vast chamber carved deep into the earth. Symbols glowed faintly on the floor, forming a wide circle. At its center stood a stone altar, worn by time and sorrow. The Vampire King stood there already. He turned slowly, his expression dark. "You should not be here," he said. "I was called," Elira replied. He studied her face, searching for something. "By what?" "The curse," she said softly. Silence filled the chamber. He closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Then it is worse than I feared." He told her the truth that night. The curse was bound to him, but anchored by her bloodline. Her mother had not only sealed it, she had created a living path for it to be broken, one that would appear generations later. Elira. "You were born as a key," he said. "Not a weapon, not a sacrifice, a choice." Her breath shook. "A choice between what?" He looked at the altar. "Between my immortality and your freedom, between the kingdom as it is and whatever comes after." Elira felt tears rise, but she did not let them fall. "If the curse breaks," she said, "what happens to you?" "I become mortal," he answered. "And the kingdom loses the power that has protected it for centuries." "And if it does not break?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Then it will consume you instead," slowly, quietly. Her heart clenched. "You knew this," she said. "Yes. And you still brought me here." "I tried not to," he said. "Fate was louder than I was." Days passed after that, heavy with unspoken words. The court grew restless. Old nobles argued behind closed doors. Some demanded Elira's removal. Others feared what would happen if she left. "She is the curse," they whispered. "She is the cure," others argued. Elira felt trapped between their fear and his silence. The Vampire King began teaching her instead. Not magic, but history, truth. He showed her the kingdom as it once was, bright, living, full of hope. He showed her what it became after the curse, strong, unchanging, but frozen in endless night. "This is what I chose," he said. "Stability over life." "And my mother?" Elira asked. "She chose love over safety," he replied. Elira thought often of her mother then, of the quiet woman who had sung her to sleep, who had smiled even when sadness lived behind her eyes. "She did not want me to repeat her path," Elira said one night. "No," the king agreed. "She wanted you to choose your own." As the full moon approached, the pull grew unbearable. Elira began to feel the curse in her dreams. A voice, not cruel but cold, whispered of balance and cost. It spoke of crowns and endings, of promises waiting to be fulfilled. The kingdom itself seemed to lean toward her. One night, unrest finally broke free. A group of ancient nobles confronted the king in the throne room. "She cannot remain," they said. "Her presence weakens you." "She is not your queen," another added. "She is a risk." The king stood tall, power burning quietly in his eyes. "She is under my protection." "For how long?" one asked. "Until she destroys you," the room trembled. Elira stepped forward before the king could speak. "I will not hide," she said, "and I will not be decided by fear." The court fell silent. "I will face the curse," she continued, "but not as a tool, not as a sacrifice." The king turned sharply toward her. "You do not understand what you are offering." "I understand enough," she replied. "I understand that nothing changes if no one dares to choose differently." That night, the king went to her chambers. He did not command, he asked. "If you walk away," he said, "I will let the curse remain. I will protect you from it as long as I can." "And if I stay?" she asked. "Then I risk losing everything," he said, "including you." Alira looked at him, seeing not a king, but a man who had already lost too much. "I do not want your crown," she said. "I do not want your power." "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "I want the truth to end," she replied. The final night came. The ritual chamber was prepared. The circle glowed brighter than before. The kingdom waited in breathless silence. Alira stood at the edge of the circle. The vampire king stood opposite her. "If you step inside," he said, "there may be no turning back." Alira closed her eyes. She thought of her mother's smile, of the village she came from, of the future she refused to let be written by fear. She stepped forward. The ground beneath her feet began to glow. The curse stirred fully now, rising like a storm held together by old promises. The air shook. The symbols burned bright. Alira opened her eyes and spoke, not the words written in prophecy, but her own. "I choose neither silence nor sacrifice," she said. "I choose change." The circle blazed with light. The vampire king reached for her and the curse answered. Light filled the ritual chamber. Not fire, not darkness. Light soft, wide, and steady, like the first dawn the world had forgotten. The symbols on the floor no longer burned. They changed, shifting shape as if listening. The air no longer pressed down on Alira's chest. Instead, it lifted her, holding her upright as the curse twisted around her words. The vampire king felt it first. Something ancient loosened its grip on his heart. He staggered back, one hand gripping the stone altar. The power that had lived inside him for centuries began to move, not leaving him in pain but flowing outward like a river finding its end. "Alira," he said, his voice breaking. She stood in the center of the circle, light wrapped around her like a promise. Her feet trembled, but she did not fall. "I am here," she said. The curse spoke then, not as a voice but as a feeling. It resisted. It searched for the familiar path of sacrifice, of silence, of loss. But Alira did not give it that path. "I am not my mother," she said calmly. "And you are not the same king you were." The circle shook. The curse tried to bind itself to the old rules, but the rules no longer held. Above them, cracks appeared in the stone ceiling. Moonlight poured through, touching the symbols, changing them into something new. The vampire king felt his knees weaken. For the first time in centuries, his body remembered limits. He was afraid, but beneath that fear was relief. The light surged once more and then stopped. Silence followed. Alira collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. The glow faded, leaving the chamber quiet and still. The curse was gone, not destroyed, ended. The vampire king rushed to her side, catching her before she fell completely. His hands shook as he held her, not as a ruler holding power, but as a man holding something precious and fragile. "Alira," he whispered, "stay with me." Her eyes fluttered open. "You are shaking," she said faintly. He laughed once quietly in disbelief. "So are you." The guards and nobles arrived moments later, flooding the chamber with fear and confusion. They stopped when they saw him. The vampire king was pale, breathing hard, his crown resting crooked on his head. Mortal. The ancient nobles stepped back in shock. "What have you done?" one whispered. The king straightened slowly, still holding Alira. His presence was different now, not weaker, but warmer, less distant. "She has freed us," he said, "all of us." The kingdom did not fall, it changed. The days that followed were uncertain, filled with questions and quiet fear. The sun began to touch parts of the land it never had before. Crops stirred, rivers shifted, time moved again. The vampire king no longer ruled by endless night. He ruled by choice. Some nobles left. Others stayed. New voices rose where silence once ruled. And Alira, she recovered slowly. She spent her days in the gardens, watching the flowers grow under true sunlight. She felt tired often, but alive in a way she never had before. The king visited her there not as a watcher from shadows, but as a man learning how to walk in daylight. "You could have taken the crown," he said one afternoon. Elira smiled gently. "I never wanted it." "You could still stay," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Not as a subject," she said, "and not as a symbol. As an equal," he asked quietly. She did not answer right away. Instead, she stood and looked across the land stretching beyond the walls. "I need to see the world," she said, "to live a life that belongs to me." His chest tightened. "I understand," he said. She turned back to him, surprised. "You do?" "Yes," he said, "because for the first time so do I." Elira left the mansion at dawn. No guards followed her, no chains bound her. She carried nothing but a small bag and the memory of a mother who had chosen love, and a king who had learned to let go. Years passed. Stories spread across the land. They spoke of a kingdom that survived the end of its curse. Of a former vampire king who aged slowly now, ruling with patience instead of fear. Of a woman who walked freely through villages and cities, healing old wounds simply by reminding people that fate could be changed. Sometimes, travelers claimed they saw her walking beside him along the borders of the realm. Sometimes they said she came alone. The truth was quieter. Elira returned one evening, years later, when the moon was full and the gardens bloomed brighter than ever. The king was older now. Lines marked his face. His crown rested beside him, not always worn. He felt her presence before he saw her. "You came back," he said softly. "I told you I would," she replied. They stood together in silence, not bound by prophecy or curse, only choice. The night did not fear the dawn anymore, and love, at last, was free to exist without cost.